So this is going to be my last video on the guided reading series that is small group or one-on-one reading that I've been doing. I've already covered preparing for the lesson and actually doing the lesson. Today I'm going to kind of summarize it with how to organize it and put it all together. Something that's very important to do with guided reading is to document. When I say document, I'm really talking about two parts. Part one is the preparation for the lesson, and part two is how your student or child is doing during the lesson. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I have showed you guys the ugly way of documenting a lot of things. And today, I'm actually going to cover a more formal, pretty way of how I really did document things. So I'll talk about how I would organize my classroom and how I would do that differently if I was doing it at home. In my classroom, before the lesson, for every book I picked out, I would take a paper in which I typed out the vocabulary lessons I anticipated they would have trouble with, the sight words I wanted to cover, the sight word activity I was planning on doing, the phonics concepts I wanted to cover, the phonics activity I was planning on doing, the focus point, and the comprehension questions I wanted to ask. Then I would take that paper, place it inside the book, and then put the book in a color folder. Each group would have a different color, and so that all the folders would match those colors. And then I put that whole folder in a bin that I kept at my table. In another bin, I would keep the 5 or so extra copies of the book that the students would then be reading, bundled up together with a rubber band, placed together by groups. Each student had their own pouch that they would bring to the table with them when we did our guided reading session. And then upon completion, I would take that book and place it in the pouch. That pouch would then either go into the book box, which is a box, a bin that collected books for each and every student to be able to read independently during independent reading time, or it would go with them home for homework. That really depended on the rules and regulations set by the school regarding those books being used outside school property. Monday through Thursday, I would meet with 3 groups a day. The lower reading levels I would meet with every day. My highest reading level I would meet with once or twice a week. On Fridays, I would do my assessments. I would assess any students that I wasn't quite sure if I was hitting them on the right level, or a student that maybe was absent, so I haven't really assessed them recently, or a student that required a more formal assessment, so a book that I hadn't done any previous lessons with, or any activities with, or anything else with, it's just a brand new book to that student, so that I can give them a more formal one-on-one assessment. I'm looking for above 90% on the words correct and at least a 50% on the questions correct to be able to move them up to the next level. If their books were in pouches in their book boxes, every 3 weeks I would go through and take out books that were older than a week. If I were to organize it at home, I would probably take binders with pocketed dividers and be able to put my book and my paper in those pockets, but I'm also someone who loves binders. Another option is to use a magazine organizer on the wall. There are many desk organizers that are out there, including the 3-door plastic one. That'd be good for this as well. There are many great ideas out there if you Google the phrase guided reading organizing. So now, how did I organize the documentation I kept for while they were reading? Remember how I love binders? So I had a big one where I had a bunch of blank running records and a divider for each student. For more information about how to keep running records, you can watch my previous video about reading levels. Just a quick note here that if you're doing running records while the child's reading to you after you've done a lesson with them and done activities regarding the book, then you really need to be looking for 95% above and 70% above on the questions to be able to move that child up to the next reading level. This is a little different than what I talked about on Fridays when I did a more formal assessment, because that book hadn't been used before in the lesson. So after I document how the student was doing, I actually did not put it in the binder with the dividers yet. I actually had a folder that I put it in that was still in the binder with a checklist. I check off that I had that student read to me and I documented it. So every time a child comes to my table, they read to me, at least for a little bit. But I don't necessarily document and check off how they're doing every single time, but I make sure I do it at least once in every 2-week period. So at the end of the 2 weeks, I've had every single student read to me and assessed on paper. If I were to do this at home, the thing I would do differently would be I would use whatever organization technique I used for the before reading, and I would just add this to that. So, for example, if I was using a binder with the pocket folders, I would add in the running records to that same binder. If I was using a magazine organizer on the wall, I would make one section where I would put the running records in that section, and so on and so forth. One thing I would do different though is if I only had 1 to 3 students and not 20 plus students, I would do weekly assessments and not every 2-week period, but every week. Another thing would be on Fridays, I would still not do a guided reading lesson, but I'd instead replace it with independent activities with what you were learning with guided reading. This is because in a classroom setting, while you have a small group with you, the other students are doing independent centers, again, about what you're learning in class. And if your child's coming to you every day and doing the activities with you regarding guided reading, and they don't get those center activities, they're missing out on independent practice, which is a very important, not just school skill, but life skill. And so Fridays would be a great day to start adding that into your curriculum. If you want ideas on activities to do with your child on Fridays, you can Google center activities for and then the topic that you have. For example, short A, if you're doing a specific letter sound, sight words, if you're doing sight word activities that are general. Comprehension can even be in a game. So you just have to figure out what you want to do an activity on, and then you can Google ideas for it. This concludes, for now, my guide to guided reading. If you would like to hear other ideas and topics, please let me know, and I will try to cover more things with my next video.